All right. Welcome to episode number 2 of what I like to call Rappin' on the Rangers. And this week, I have 1/3 of the KNC masterpiece. We're just gonna call it KMC masterpiece for this particular episode. Former pitcher Mike Bacsik joining us on Rappin' on the Rangers. Mike, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me. And if you hear a dog in the background, since we're rapping Rangers, his name is Ranger. So I can't do it. He is a barking dog.
Well, that's appropriate for him joining the episode too. So as we're recording this, the Rangers are on a 3-game winning streak. I know that's one of the Cardinal sins of doing videos like this. Like, you can't talk about current events of what's going on, but we're doing it here anyway. But for you, as a pitcher who has watched this rotation and this bullpen kind of go through its struggles at times with some inconsistency, but also dealing with injuries, what have you made about some of the resilience of some of the guys, specifically like a Lance Lynn, who's got a 1.16 ERA and has arguably been the best pitcher for this team so far this season?
Man, Lance Lynn has been tremendous, and I don't think there's any argument. He has been. I mean, it is, besides Shane Bieber, who's pitching for the Indians, I would vote him. If I was doing Cy Young voting today, I would vote him second in the American League for the Cy Young race. He has been tremendous leading this team in pitching. I think he's become more of a leader in his second season with the Texas Rangers, and I'm just judging that off of interviews. He just seems more comfortable being part of the Rangers and doing interviews and really taking on the leadership role that I believe, being an ace pitcher, the top of the rotation type of guy sometimes needs to be. I had like Al Leiter comes to mind when I pitched for the New York Mets, a guy that really was the leader of our pitching staff. And it's kind of like football. There can be a main leader, but usually you're going to have a defensive leader and an offensive leader. And for a baseball team, you're usually going to have a guy that's a pitcher that's a leader of the pitching staff and a guy that's a leader of the players. And usually the players leader is also the overall leader, usually on teams. But through the 3-game winning streak, the sweep of the Angels, I thought the bullpen did a really nice job. I won't say that it was perfect because it wasn't clean innings, but they did work out of jams. And the ultimate goal is to put a 0 on the board. At the end of the inning, did you put a 0 on the board? And the pitching staff, which was struggling, especially the bullpen on the road trip, put zeros on the board, and big, big zeros at times.
Has that been a matter of more so health with guys like Joely Rodriguez coming back, Brett Martin, Rafael Montero, who's found his stride a little bit, with a couple of saves already? Has it been just an idea of maybe just get some of these guys healthy and some of the talent that we've seen that we thought coming into the season may be coming to fruition now that these guys are actually healthy and ready to go day in and day out?
Yes, that's part of it. That is definitely part of getting some guys healthy that you were hoping that would start the season if there was a real season, to start in late March. But once you started this, you had some guys that weren't ready to go. And now that they're ready to go, it has helped. Now, the one thing about this bullpen is it's not like maybe when you look at the New York Yankees bullpen or maybe even at times the Dodgers bullpen, where there's kind of guys that you know who they are. They've done it for 5 to 7 years in the major leagues, and you have a good idea. Relievers are tough. They're tricky. They can have a bad season out of nowhere or an unbelievably great season out of nowhere. But you usually have an idea if a guy's pitched about 5 years in the big leagues, what they're going to bring to the table. And this Rangers bullpen, for the most part, there's a lot of unknowns. How good can this guy be now? How good can he be in the future? Can he be consistent throughout this 60-game season? And so that's really, to me, a really interesting, fun part of this Rangers season is it's only 60 games. It's tough to put definitions on a 60-game season and say this guy is now this. But it will be fun watching all of these young, somewhat inexperienced bullpen pieces come together and have a mix of what can we expect in the future.
And that's kind of an interesting point that you brought up, because I feel like it's really difficult in a season that's only 60 games to really do the kind of true evaluation collectively from top to bottom, whether it be a rotation or an entire staff or, hitters from day in to day out. Is that a little bit tougher to try and evaluate how good a team can be based on what the sample size will be this year, normally with getting 162 games?
Yeah, I think John Daniels and every general manager and president and owner on where they're going to go after this season is over, if they're going to want to rebuild or add, money to the team because they think they're close. We've just seen too many examples of teams that are really hot for a month, a player that's really hot for a month, and then they really cool off. And then you're like, well, okay, they came back to where we thought they would be, or man, they really exceeded expectations. And in this 60-game season, it's going to be really tough to put a definition on a player, whether it's Nick Solak, if he has a good 60-game season, or if Willie Calhoun struggles for 60 games. I don't think that means that you should give up on Willie Calhoun and not think that he can be a major part of your hitting lineup. But it gives you an idea, but I just don't think you want to put kind of those he is this or he isn't this at just this 60-game season.
And a guy who was added to this team prior to the season starting, who I think has really had a real infectious attitude around the clubhouse, is a guy in Todd Frazier, hitting, around 310, 311. But he seems like a guy, not just from his veteran presence of being in the league in a long time, but a guy coming in and helping a young team really learn how to be professionals day in and day out. What have you thought about him and his addition to this team, not just from a production standpoint, which has been pretty good so far, but overall what he brings to this team from a clubhouse standpoint?
Well, I'm going to use my 12-year-old as a great example here of who Todd Frazier is. We were watching a game a couple nights ago, and he said, is Todd Frazier like our Hunter Pence this year? And I said, yes, he's exactly like our Hunter Pence. He's a guy who's been through a lot of games, a lot of battles, a lot of different situations. He has a very positive attitude, an upbeat attitude. And so he takes Hunter Pence's spot. Now, Pence made the All-Star team last year. It'd be tough in the 60 games to repeat what we saw Hunter Pence do in the first half of last season before he got hurt. But yes, he's our Hunter Pence. He's a guy that you really need on this team. There are other veteran guys. Obviously, Elvis is a veteran guy. Chu's a veteran guy. But Todd Frazier, he reminds me of like a Hunter Pence type of personality.
And what has his presence meant for a guy in Joey Gallo, who we know is kind of the end-all be-all in terms of the real star of this team, and what he can help him continue to develop not only as a player, but a guy who I would think at some point will eventually become that guy in terms of the leader in the clubhouse, if that's something that he will continue to embrace going forward for himself.
Yeah, I think that Joey Gallo getting a lot of different people in his career, as Ranger in the background gets excited, is he's had Adrian Beltre in his life, and he's had Hunter Pence, and now he has Todd Frazier. He's had Chu, and he's had Elvis. He's had a lot of different guys that he can pick and choose from, the things that he kind of liked the way they led, or maybe not saying disliked or thought was bad, but things that maybe doesn't fit his personality. Everybody has a different personality and has to figure out their style, their personality on how to, if you're frustrated with the team or happy with the team, if you become that team leader. And Joey Gallo, you kind of have to be when you become the face of the franchise, the star guy, the team you're building the lineup around. It's tough not to. I will say you can. I'll use the example. Josh Hamilton was a guy you built your lineup around. Josh Hamilton was not a guy that you wanted to be a leader of your team in a way of leading the clubhouse, but you had Michael Young, and then in 2011 you had Adrian Beltre, and you just, those are the two guys that come to mind because those were the major leaders. But you had Nelly Cruz, you had different guys that could really help out in that way, so you could allow Josh to not have to have any of that responsibility. Because look, I mean, he created his tough life, but he had somewhat of a tough life that you didn't want to do it. But
Sure.
For Gallo, yeah, I think that he is growing into that. And the one thing on the field that Todd Frazier really helps, especially with the new rule, you bring in a lefty to try to get Joey Gallo out, and there's not two outs. Todd Frazier crushes left-handed hitting.
Yeah, and it's been fun to watch him as he continues to assimilate himself into this team, and then Joey Gallo, who continues to crush left-handed pitching as he does, those two in the lineup. So those two playing really well. I think another guy who's really, we heard a lot about him during the spring training and then summer camp 2.0, if you will, and just the maturation of him growing as a player is Isiah Kiner-Falefa, and a guy hitting, 333 now, but really, I think coming into his own and the comfortability of him, knowing that he's going to be out there every day, mostly at third base. What have you made about him and his progress as a player and the maturity that he's continued to show, especially now as he continues to play well as of late?
Man, so far it's been tremendous. And you talk about an ultimate team guy who tried to become a catcher. And in a pinch, if you had a regular season with 26 guys, he would be your third catcher if you ever needed him in a situation where you get into extra innings and pinch running or something. But I think he's coming into his own. I heard Tom Grieve on the game the other day. He reminds him of Fletcher, who's having a great season for the Angels, hitting right in front of Mike Trout. And I'm going to bring this up on the KMC Masterpiece this week during Nuggets at some point. It's been one of the nuggets I want to get to this week is I'm going to ask you this question, Kevin.
Okay.
You can ask me any questions.
All right.
Should Isiah Kiner-Falefa be the number 2 hole hitter, let's just say, for the rest of this season?
Oh, man. That's tough because, at least for me, and so I played baseball too from the time I was 5 till I was 18. So one of the things that I learned as a player growing up is that as I continue to grow and mature, finding a comfortable spot in terms of a lineup or a comfortable position on the field, and then growing and maturing into that position, I needed that kind of time so that, not because I didn't necessarily embrace the pressure, but it was something as a ball player growing and maturing, I needed that before saying, hey, we need you in the number 2 hole, or we need you in this certain spot of the lineup, because I may not necessarily have been ready to assume that role. And for me, if Joey Gallo is going to stay at the 4 and then that third hitter is going to be interchangeable, I don't know if Kiner-Falefa right now needs to be put in that kind of a position just because he's really coming into his own. I think the spot that he's in right now would allow himself to grow and mature that way still. But I could see that for him in the future, because if he continues to hit this way, you want to get him up as many times as you can during a baseball game, as long as he's continuing to be consistent. I would just like to see him right now stay where he is and continue to grow and develop in that way.
I think that's a great answer. I love that answer. I think for this team, I'm leaning towards batting him second, but in a perfect role for Kiner-Falefa. And I'm not saying for the rest of his career, but you would love to bat him ninth. And here's why. Because a lot of times leadoff hitters now are guys that can pop the ball out of the ballpark. You think about Acuna or Betts or Chu. You know, I mean, he's going to have, in a regular season, he would have 20 to 28 home runs. And then all of a sudden, you get a guy who can run the bases, who can score from first base on the double, who's going to be able to score from second on most singles in the outfield. And so I would love Kiner-Falefa to kind of, on where he is right now in his development, Kevin, what you're talking about is stay near the bottom of the order, almost be a leadoff guy. So when that lineup turns over, your first hitter, now when he comes up, he has a guy that can run, that can score on a base hit. But as he develops, maybe give him a stronger role. So I hear exactly what you're saying. I'd love for him to bat ninth. But I think on this team right now, with guys struggling, even though they've won 3 in a row, with some guys still struggling with their at-bats, maybe batting a guy who's batting over 300, battling the pitcher every time he comes up there, he makes the pitcher work his butt off, could be good batting right behind Chu.
Because he gives me the vibe that he is not going to be a guy that buckles under pressure, or is a guy that's going to embrace whatever he needs to, because as you mentioned, he was asked to do different things and was willing to do those things for the betterment of the team. So to me, that screams a guy who's, one, is a team player first, but 2, nothing is going to bother him. He's going to be real unflappable in situations where he's going to be asked to do those things. But, I want to see him continue to do his thing for now until he gets, to that point. But I think a guy that, as we kind of go through this some more, not just offensively, but kind of going back to the rotation a little bit, and I want to get your perspective on this, especially being a lefty also. Mike Minor has struggled in terms of velocity as of late. And for a pitcher, how unsettling is that, knowing that you have a certain expectation of, whether you are, a finesse guy or a power guy, that certain pitches or certain velocities aren't where they need to be because either it's a health ailment or whatever the case may be. What do you think Mike Minor is kind of dealing with in terms of that, in terms of trying to figure that out, or whatever may be going on with him?
Well, I would say that some guys really rely on velocity. There are guys that need to throw the ball in the mid-90s or higher. I mean, that's what they do. They're more throwers than pitchers. Unfortunately, I wish I would have had the choice, but I did not throw the ball hard at all. So I had to really, early on, once I hit low A ball and got beat up, I had to figure out how to be more of a pitcher than just a thrower. And so for Mike Minor, I think right now, I don't know him personally, but I know what I love about him. He takes responsibility for whatever happens on the field. He doesn't make excuses that something happened defensively or the umpire did something. So he takes responsibility for whatever happened on the field. So I love that. So I think he can improve from there. I think velocity can be really overrated, because I just think I'm 42 years old. So most of the time that I watched baseball as a kid, there was no radar gun. There was nothing on the television or going to a baseball game that would tell you how hard somebody was throwing. That started probably in the mid to late 90s, I think, when we started getting the idea of how hard was that pitch, and almost every pitch is you go off of how the hitter is reacting off of you. Are you messing up their timing? That's the goal of the pitcher, is to mess up their timing, whether by throwing it so hard that they can't catch up or by taking something off where they're way out in front and they're confused on how do I time this guy up. Right now, for this season, for the most part, not all the time, but most of the time, the guys are really squaring up Mike Minor. They're taking healthy swings off of Mike Minor. So yes, one indication is the velocity is slowing down. His last start, it started off okay, and then it slowed down quickly as the game progressed. And that can be a sign of whether there's something physically wrong or there's maybe a little bit of lack of confidence and he's trying to place the ball. He's trying to be so cute or so fine with his pitches that he's not releasing it and really trusting it and finishing off his pitch. He could be, I don't know, he could be decelerating after he releases the ball. Instead of, wham, going through it hard, he releases it and kind of slows down and is almost trying to place it where he needs to be, which will take off speed, which will take off that action late on the ball, which can cause a hitter to swing and think they have it and be jammed or hit it off the end or swing and miss. And I think his last game, he didn't have any swings and misses on his fastball. So there's indicators there, not just velocity, but the guys are seeing the ball well and swinging hard when they see the ball off of Mike Minor right now. I think it's correctable. I don't know the ultimate answer to what needs to be corrected to get him back on track.
Last couple of things before we get you out of here. Obviously, this is a team with certain expectations in certain spots. We thought, coming in, the bullpen would be, fairly decent. The rotation we thought could be a potential strength of this team, kind of been hit by the injury bug. What have you made about the resilience of a guy in Chris Woodward who has had to manage a lot of this in terms of moving parts, which every manager has to do, but in a compressed 60-game schedule, I'm sure that's much more magnified in this kind of a season more than normal. What have you made about his resilience and how he's been able to handle his team and how they have responded as of late, given some of the adversity that they've had to deal with so far?
I think his sanity was being tested a little bit on that road trip where they only won one game in San Francisco and got swept in Oakland. I think that a little bit of the shortness of the season, having the worst record in the American League after 11 games for them, was frustrating. And I think that he was frustrated because he felt like this team is better than everything they were doing, defensively, offensively, pitching the ball, especially the bullpen. That seemed to, even though it was early in the game, handing a 3-2 lead or whatever it was in some of these situations and kind of immediately giving it up and finding yourself behind by the time you get to the seventh inning when you had a lead early in the game. And so I think he's been tested with his patience, and it's probably really tough. I've never been in the situation of being the manager of a major league team, but there has to be quite a bit of pressure, especially when your team isn't winning to start a season off, and now in this shortened season, even more pressure. But luckily, I think he's done a nice job, and that sweep, at least winning 2 out of 3, and I'm glad they swept. That was awesome. But they really needed to win that series because I'm sure the confidence, we're all human. No matter how good we are at something or okay or bad at something, our confidence can be shaken. And I think after 11 games, the confidence of this team was a little bit shaken, but they got the win in the first game. And then now I think going into, the Seattle series, which we're about to start up, I believe that they have good confidence and they have the ability. I think they're better than Seattle personally. So I really think that they should win this series. And if they can get back to 500 by the time that we get to, midweek here, it could be a great sign because the American League West, honestly, looks pretty weak. Oakland looks great. Yeah. Oakland looks like they could win the whole thing.
When they're not
everybody
fighting the other
else
team, right?
Looks right now average at best.
Yeah, especially when Oakland isn't fighting, the other team. I tweeted out, I was like, look, this is why we can't have nice things, okay? We cannot have nice things because y'all are getting out here, fighting out here in Major League Baseball. Like, stop it, man. So socially distance, please. Last question before we get you out of here. I know how much you love Luka Doncic. I know that Luka that's your man. Tell me, Mike Bacsik, who is the Luka Doncic of Major League Baseball right now?
Oh, man. Great question. Mike Trout's the easy answer. I love watching Mike Trout play. I'm a big fan of the young guys. I'm a big fan of Ronald Acuna Jr. I really think that he can carry the Braves to something special. Ozzie Albies with them is a really nice young piece, gotten off to a slow start. And I know that as I speak right now, Acuna's 5 for his last 6 with, I believe, 3 home runs. So he's gotten off to a slow start, except for his last couple games. I'm in love with Acuna Jr. as a young guy. And then, for me, it doesn't get any better than watching Mike Trout play.
Yeah, it's he's the gold standard of this whole thing in Major League Baseball. I was joking with Sandler last week. I was like, man, I'm 33, and I feel like I'm already old already because on the cover of ESPN's cover story, Fernando Tatis Jr. I'm like, jeez, man, they got Tatis's kid out here, raking and doing what he does. It's a crazy time to think that these guys are coming up the way that they are.
Well, I'll give you for another, podcast, the position of shortstop. If you look at the numbers last year and you look at what is happening now with Tatis blowing up and some other young guys coming up like Bo Bichette and what they're doing, now your shortstop in a full season, they need to be a 25 homer, 285 batter with 80 to 100 RBIs and 80 to 100 plus runs scored. I mean, that's just the position now. Shortstop used to be defense first, and then, hey, if you're Nomar Garciaparra or Derek Jeter or Alex Rodriguez, right? There were a few when I played coming up that were like tremendous offensive players and good defensive players. But you had a lot of more like Omar Vizquel type of guys, like or Ozzie Smith, like play that unbelievable great defense. Whatever you give us offensively is just extra. And now it is, hey, our shortstop, whether it's a guy like Trevor Story popping almost 40 home runs in a season, Xander Bogaerts, Tim Anderson, you can go down the list of just shortstops now they're one of your best offensive weapons.
Yeah, it's fun to watch because it's a lot of young, talented guys at that position. That's really, as you kind of mentioned, become more of a power position these days, more than your traditional.
Oh gosh, and I didn't even mention Francisco Lindor. I can't believe.
That's your man too. Yeah.
Francisco Lynn. I take back my Ronald Acuna Jr. I was thinking with my baseball card head for a second. Francisco Lindor, man. Love that guy.
Yeah. Well, a lot of talented guys coming up through the major league ranks. Mike Bacsik, 1/3 of the KMC masterpiece. Good enough to join us on Rappin on the Ranges. Mike, I appreciate the time, man. I appreciate the few minutes, man.
Thank you. It's fun talking baseball.
Yeah, most definitely. All right.